The topic of the day is woman hater, man eater. Now, talking about gender is a little like asking, when did you stop beating your wife? Because there doesn't seem to be two views about it. When I looked up crimes against women, there was a whole Toby list of infanticide, rape, marital rape, honor killing, all kinds of things. And then I looked up crimes against men, and interestingly, there were a few, but nothing to write home about. So today we're going to talk about this whole gender thing. In my opinion, there's a gender war that's going on. And we see it in all kinds of ways, big and small. But I'm going to invite four very, very interesting and credible voices on gender to enlighten us, to provoke us, and to engage us all over again in a subject that's on everybody's mind. So I'm going to start with Manu Joseph to talk about not only women, but very serious women, because the last book he wrote was Serious Men. So Manu, over to you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, but I wanted to stand behind something. See, about man-eaters that are not tigers, I don't know much about them. And as far as woman haters are concerned, I think there are two types. I think they are the misanthropes who are confused as misogynists, because these are just men.
Yeah. We can't hear what Manu is saying,
Okay.
and then we won't be having a discussion. Can you sit?
Okay,
Let's try that.
can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
This happened last year, so I had to go to the audience and listen to the speakers. So I was saying that there are misanthropes who are confused as misogynists. Sorry. Is it clear now? Okay. Okay, I think there's something fixed about this point that I'm trying to make about misanthropes who are confused as misogynists. So I think I'm going to move on. So I'm going to interpret the topic this way. The relationship between men and women over the decades, what has changed and what has not changed. Recently, the New Yorker magazine carried a cartoon where this man is telling his wife, gays and lesbians want to get married, haven't they suffered enough? So the reaction that we have to the couple, I mean, probably expose who's married in this hall and who's not married yet. We all seem to have a reaction to marriage as though it is, as a critic once described marriage. She described marriage as an abduction. And I think most people who are married will be able to identify this description of marriage. I think we all start with love, because that's what I think most of us are good at. I think even Donald Trump is good at it. But then at some point, I feel that because of personal experiences, because the stakes are so high, because it means a lot to us, I feel that women are radicalized by men, and men are radicalized by women, and we are radicalized by the people, by the very people we love. And that has not changed over the years. If you take the marriage of our parents and the marriages that you see now and the relationship that people are having, I feel that men and women are constantly getting radicalized by gender, and that has not changed. And so when men talk about women, they're usually talking about their wives. There is a sort of men who talk about their mothers. I think they're just Catholic or Parsis. And when women talk about, if it's a 20-year-old girl who's talking about men, I think usually she's talking about her father, but anything after 20, she's talking about the men she knows as an adult. And people are all the time exposing feel that that is not change, that will not change the mediocrity of men talking about women, the mediocrity of women talking about men, because we really don't understand the other that well. We just sleep with the other species. It's an interspecies cohabitation. But we struggle to understand the other, and I think that the struggle will go on, and that's not going to change. But I want to talk about some happy things also. I feel that one place where gender has changed a lot is in the elimination of a particular kind of a family man. I think most of us would know him as our father. Now, there is a moment in Akhil Sharma's book where he says, "I thought my father was given to us by the government because he was so useless." I think many of our fathers were just that. He would just sit there and everything was done to him and he would do nothing, and there was this idea that he was doing something and that was running the house. But now that man cannot survive today. That man is gone. And also, along with that man, the alpha male, the alpha male is nowhere to be found anymore. Even just 10, 15 years ago, there was this alpha male. But now what is happening is that there is a lot of pressure on men to be decent human beings. And you have to, they have to, you have to come back home at a particular time. You know the ages of your children, you know the names of your children, you know the names of your maids. Men know the names of the maids these days. Men also know which class the child is going to. And he also knows the names of the teachers, even if they're not very attractive. So, and also, of course, they wipe baby shit, and also they transfer food from big bowls to small bowls and put it in the fridge. I mean, so they do all kinds of things which I thought there was a time when I thought men are not capable of that. They also buy cushions, a lot of cushions for the house. So I think that transformation has happened for various reasons, but also today the alpha male cannot happen because the happiest, I always believe that the happiest men in the world are men who didn't want to be or don't want to be their fathers. And what these guys do when they grow up in an office situation is that they ensure that anybody who looks or behaves like their father has no place in that, or they just give them a hard time. For example, in none of the Indian media organizations for the last 5 or 8 years can you get drunk and come in. I mean, that was unheard of till even 8 years ago. Or in my office in Open till 5 years ago, As a journalist, you could always drink and walk in, and you could do, and that licking the pickles and sitting in a circle and talking about things. So slowly, a particular kind of young men are making a particular kind of older men obsolete. And that is again further putting pressure on men to be decent. But in the middle of all this, there is a new kind of a guy who has risen. And I usually have some kind of a problem. It's just, I don't know what it is. I have some kind of issues with this new creature who has risen from the pressure on men to be good human beings, which is the male feminist. And the male feminist doesn't say a set of things. But I find him, I'm not very convinced. I think it's some kind of a charlatan. I'm not saying he's doing it to get laid. I think we're beyond that stage. But it is just that I feel that you can't be a feminist without having the experience of the female body. And I think that's integral to an intellectual movement like feminism. I'm not saying men have no role in it. You can read and you can intellectually enrich yourself about what that movement is instead of plonking yourself right in the middle of it and claiming things that you don't feel. Recently I said this and someone was very annoyed saying that men can make omelets for their wives, and that's feminism. I don't think so. Making omelets for your wife is called making omelets. It is not called feminism, you know. But I think there is a lot of things. I mean, intellectually, it's a rich time. There is a lot that we can learn about other genders. I feel that is a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. I get a very strong feeling that this is going to be a male-bashing debate from the audience. And about Manu, I can say that what we all need, all women need, is snags, sexy new age guys. And I think you're a sexy new age guy.
I have been objectified again.
I'm going to call on Andrew Dixon to give us his views. He's a scholar, and perhaps he can talk about whether things have changed from the times of Shakespeare, when men had to play women's roles, to today, where famous women, Meryl Streep, Glenda Jackson, who's doing King Lear, I think, right now, are playing men's roles. So tell us about this man-woman thing, and if there's much ado about nothing.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Just listening to Manu speak and thinking about the historical spread of this in the last 400 years. I think it's very, very easy to look back, particularly as a historian, and say, oh, look at how far we've come, look at how much freedom there is, look at how much democracy there is. I mean, for women, obviously that's clearly the case. Absolutely, the strides that have been made, particularly in the 21st century even, let alone people of transgender issues or around the kind of particular politics of that. But then I think about Shakespeare, and I think about the way, as you mentioned, that Shakespeare plays with gender roles and fluidity. Think of As You Like It, and Rosalind, the wonderful, witty heroine of that play, who, of course, is played originally by a boy actor. At one point in the play, she is in fact a boy dressed as a girl, dressed as a boy, dressed as a girl. She's putting on various imitations of gender, trying to find what her gender role is in society, what her role as a woman is, but also, I think, what her role as a human is. And I guess I'd want to encourage some of that playfulness. I think these things can get so bitter and agonize sometimes, these kind of debates, for understandable political reasons. But I think what Shakespeare demonstrates is that gender is a form of performance. It's a role, a set of roles that we play, and we should be aware of that, and we should find that playful and enjoyable. You know, for all the sort of contestation in Shakespeare's plays, all the sort of, there are plenty of woman haters in Shakespeare's work, still I think what makes the plays work as drama is the sense that they're engaging and that they have this kind of fluidity, this playfulness to them. So maybe we should take a leaf from Shakespeare's page, even though it's 400 years ago.
What about this whole thing about androgynous behavior? Do you think that is in a way playful? There's a lot of androgyny in fashion these days, in theater, in popular entertainment. You go a few years back and you have Virginia Woolf writing about women who there's this fluidity. But we'll come back to that, because I want to introduce into this narrative Tina Brown, who has emerged as one of the strongest voices for women today with what she's doing. From a very successful media career, she has now concentrated on bringing various voices of women to the fore. So Tina, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here at the festival. Is this working? Can everyone hear okay? Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for that. I started the Women in the World Summit in 2009. It's a convening that I started in New York to bring together women from all over the world to tell their stories. Women you've often never heard of, simply because I felt that their stories were missing, really, from the dialogue. They were missing from the peacemaking table, missing from the corridors of power, and just you never heard from them. But before we get to that, I would love to comment on what my two friends here have said. I mean, Andrew, you're so right about playfulness. And I would say that one of the biggest issues between the man-woman debate right now is an absolute absence of humor and playfulness. It has become so earnest and accusatory between the sexes that there is fewer and fewer sort of bridging points from which the sexes can, mingle in a way that's appealing. And you see this with the obsession with what is called on campuses, and probably the same here, microaggressions, that students continually complain about not having a, quote, safe space to have discussions, that everything involving the sort of relationship between the sexes is tagged, sexual assault and rape, to the point that, yes, there are horrendous crimes of sexual assault and rape, and goodness knows that's what we talk about frequently on our stage. But I do think it's a very bad idea to kind of start tagging the so-called microaggressions in the same, ratcheting it up to the same degree, to the point that the sexes are backed off in crouch positions, continually accusing each other of one thing or the other. And to your point about, the pressure to be decent men, and there's also a bit of a longing, frankly, for a bit of indecency from men. But women don't even know how to access it at the right places. I mean, they're so busy accusing men of rape that they actually never get a date. And I think it's very important that we don't exaggerate that and now end up with the sexes sort of at war instead of having some humor. It's interesting as well how that can be deployed in the public debate. For instance, the new head of the Tory party in Scotland is a fantastic new woman leader who I think is the exact example of what we need. I mean, she's in her 40s. She's called Ruth Davidson. She is actually she's a former army vet. She's gay. She married her partner on the trail. But she has this great sense of humor. So when she's trolled, for instance, she had one troll who wrote on Twitter, what you need is a good, like, F, you shut your mouth and whatever. And she just tweeted back, do you kiss your mother with a mouth like that? And it was just boom. It was like using humor to just dispatch this guy. And I miss the kind of Katharine Hepburn put down sometimes in the sexual debates, as opposed to the sort of smelling salts approach and the accusatory approach, which I think is derailing feminism somewhat, so that we're not focusing on the important things. And frankly, you listed the crimes against women, which are manifold and real. And we have the honor killings, we have terrible domestic abuse in every country. I mean, America's domestic abuse figures are every bit as bad as places such as Brazil, which are absolutely horrendous. And yet we're sort of focused on the microaggressions. And I think that is a big mistake. I think we have to get back to what are the genuine crimes against women: violence, domestic abuse, honor killings, custody, unfair custody, all of these things, and not get so overheated about the micro things, because it's actually spoiling the kind of the man-woman dynamic in many ways, I think.
I totally agree that there should be a lot more humor in the man-woman narrative, and for that, I'm going to invite Mrunalini Deshmukh, who is known as the Rottweiler lawyer for divorce. I'm going to invite her to tell us about crimes against men that she's come up against. What are the crimes that women commit against men? Because the paucity of them would lead to a lot of humor, I guess.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'm audible in the last row also. Thank you so much for inviting me for this wonderful session that we are having. And I think, let me start off by saying that let's accept one thing: the man needs the woman and the woman needs the man. Now, we cannot run away from this truth. Whatever may be
the man needs the woman and the woman needs the man?
Needs the man, yes. Both need each other. Both need each other. As much as it may look like a woman in today's times may not need a man. But that's not there. And when we talk about a man, we talk about a man in its different forms. Like when it's talked about a father, a brother, a lover, a boyfriend, a husband, and so on and so forth. So having said this, Now, in these days, now in my profession, and I mainly deal with these matters of the family matters as they are called, dealing with divorce, custody, abuse, and so on and so forth. In my experience for the last 18 years, I have seen a sea change that's happening. And the sea change is that obviously women, and we all know this is no secret, that women are becoming very powerful emotionally, mentally. And one of the reasons is their financial independence. That has given them the strength to stand on their own feet and not take any kind of an abuse. So this empowerment in the real sense of the real sense of the word has really taken place, and we see, but this empowerment, let me tell you, and this is the factual sort of truth, as one would call it, the fact and the truth is that we are talking about women who are in the urban areas or the urban metros.
Mrunalini, can you talk about men as victims? How many cases have come to you?
I am not a feminist. I'm not going to I'm not going to be a man, basher in this thing. I'm going to be area specific. The reason I'm giving this introduction is that because of this which has happened, today there are certain sections of the women who have misused and abused the law, to which the men are at the receiving end. Now, speaking as a lawyer for myself, I've seen that there are the legislation and the judiciary also in its judicial activism has made a lot of laws to enable the woman to be equal or to be empowered or to be saved from certain atrocities that may be perpetrated on her. It is for the good of the large women, but there are a certain section of women who have abused this process. Now, let me give you an example which is there. We have this amendment to the Indian Penal Code, which is section 498A, which talks about the cruelty perpetrated on the woman by the husband-in-laws, etc., etc. A very noble provision in law. And this was done only to enable those kind of women who were trapped in cases of dowry, in cases of harassment, abuse, etc. This hallowed provision of law has been misused by certain sections of the women at the cost of the men and his family members being falsely accused, the men and the family members in certain cases being imprisoned, kept behind bars, only based on some false complaints that were made by the women. Now, these are the cases that we see how men are at the receiving end in the sense of what the legal situation today is. That does not mean that there are no cases where men are being abusive towards women and so on and so forth. But there are also certain section of men who are at the receiving end because of the false cases which are there. We also see a lot of false cases and complaints which are being filed to negotiate for a better settlement. So there is no substance in the complaint, but the complaint has been filed so that I am in a better position to negotiate a better settlement.
So, Mrunalini, I just want to ask you, in all the cases, what percent of cases do you find that women are the genuine victims and men are the genuine victims? There must be a huge difference.
Well, yes, I would say so. I would say 60 to 65% of the cases would be where the women come with genuine complaints. And that is the reason I was giving a difference between a woman who is in urban metro and a woman who comes from a town or a smaller place. So and unfortunately, the urban metro women fall in that 35% where there is abuse and where women are at the receiving end. That's the reason I started by saying.
Tina, do you want to say something about this? Laws which have been institutionalized to protect women, according to one of our top lawyers, are being misused by women to victimize men.
Certain sections.
I think it's always been true, obviously, that women, when they can, particularly if they have married to someone with money, will decide they're just going to take as much as they can. I mean, that is very true in America, in which frequently a woman, can access the law to really ruin their husbands when it's not fair, and we see that a lot. But I also see, on the other side, far more, particularly in affluent areas in the United States, where the husband really can out-lawyer the woman to the point that she's left with nothing. I see it time and time again. I know many, many women who have been married to very rich men who just haven't got the means to fight. And the weapon that the man uses is the children. They say, they start to accuse the woman of being a bad mother in various ways, so that the woman has to give up her job to prove that she's at home all the time, where she has to reject the idea that somehow she was a mother who was wanting, because the husband is so, can out-lawyer and then demand silence. I mean, even in the case of Donald Trump, you will see that Ivana Trump, her affidavit in her divorce case, which painted him in an extremely negative light and actually accused him of marital rape, was brutally suppressed. And certainly the message was obviously passed to her that if there was any more talking, that was the money was going to get cut off. So you see the women are suppressed by their husband's wealth, and that is much, much more common than the wife, misbehaving in the other direction.
I was going to come to Donald Trump because today he is the elephant in the room. You can't
the
escape
elephant elect, actually.
Trump's what?
The elephant elect in the room.
The elephant elect in the room. But I just want to make a very interesting observation. Before we alighted on stage, we were all asked separately whether we would like to have a hand mic or a lapel mic. And I've just noticed that the three women preferred to hold on to their mics, and the two men decided on a lapel mic.
Because I'm going to be doing a little bit of dancing later, so I just thought it's easiest to keep my hands free.
And I was wondering about I chose a hand mic because it gave me a sense of authority, a sense of doing something, and perhaps the men are entitled enough to feel comfortable without having to hold on to something. But maybe that in itself is a little telling way in which women and men like to project themselves. We need our props. They have had their props for years. And to talk about them as victims, I think, is quite hilarious, frankly. The laws against women, divorce laws especially in this country, are abysmal. I know from experience that in America, for instance, a woman is entitled to half of what the husband has earned. In India, she has to scrounge, she has to fight. And if she even gets 5% of what she's due, that is a very big thing. But let's talk about...
If I may just add here, Malvika is absolutely right. Though our laws have empowered the women in terms of the abuse or in terms of the other things, as far as maintenance or alimony or the sharing of the marital assets is concerned, there is a bill which has been introduced, there are recommendations from the Law Commission, but she's absolutely bang on when she says that as we speak, a woman does not have a right or a share in the marital assets. Her only entitlement is her maintenance or alimony and a right of residence, which could be a rental or on an ownership basis, depending on what the status of the parties is. And the fight of all the women here, and one of them being me, is also to ensure that a woman who has invested a particular years in marriage should be entitled to her fair share of the share in the marital assets, whether she has contributed for it or otherwise.
Manu, you said something about the alpha male is almost redundant. But in this age of Trump, how can you say that? The alpha male is in pole position today.
See, I think he can become the president of America, but in the civilized world, I think there is a lot of pressure. For example, you look at situations where behavior and intellect and a lot of other things are important. So there what happens is that there is a pressure on men, probably more than women, to behave in acceptable ways. But I agree with Tina. I do find that a lot of things about the delinquency of men, which is very interesting, we have lost. It's almost like a lost heritage now. The kind of
Thank
jerks
God
who
for
used to
that.
be there, and they were always interesting.
Well, I know a lot of jerks
Yes,
in my life.
yeah.
You also said Trump was good at love. Would you like to explain that?
Trump was good at?
Love.
In the sense that, I mean, I'll put it this way, it's in a very conventional sense. This is a world where a lot of men string women along and they don't marry them. You know, in most relationships, I think marriage is either expected or it's a happy
So
ending.
he married 2 women.
Correct. He did, you know, which is, I think, I find it, I mean, when I think of Donald Trump, I ask myself, okay, you are a jerk and you're fine with that, but he's still married. So what would be his thinking? What is going on in his mind? Is it an act of decency or is there something else going on? I think
Trump likes a chatelaine. You know, Trump, he left Marla Maples mostly because she was so disorganized. You know, he likes a woman to get the house organized, get the plane to make, you know, he expects his wives to be chatelaines. You see that with Ivana, who actually took it to the nth degree and ended up running the hotels, and that was too annoying to him because it meant that she wasn't available for him. But Melania is a perfect chatelaine. It's all about having the food organized, this organized, everything organized. So that's really why he likes to be married.
Is the financial risk that he is taking in proportion to what he expects his wives to
Well,
do?
I don't think he's probably taken any. I don't know what the prenup is with Melania, but I very much doubt he's taken any risks. But we'll see.
I'm sure, I mean, legally.
Tina, I want to ask you.
Let's give it to him that he's a man who's a romantic. I don't somehow see it that way.
I mean, Trump and love. I mean, the man is good at loving himself, isn't it? I mean, and I mean, surely you see the women, you know, the women he's married and the women who surround him, and you know, the Miss Universe, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, the man seems to sort of bask somehow or need the adoration of women, but they are just, I think, for him, reflective surfaces of that enormous, gigantic, weird gold thing on top of his head. I mean, that's what he looks around and sees, isn't it? I don't see much capacity for human love, but maybe I'm cynical.
I think I'm convinced. I don't think Trump can love. So.
That was easier than I thought, Manu. That was easy.
What I want to ask Tina about, now that we're talking about America and the elections, is Hillary. What on earth happened and why did it happen?
Well, my God, it's too long to do in an answer, but you know, you could argue that in the end she was undone by the man-woman thing, actually. She could never, for instance, a classic retaliation for Hillary would have been against Trump's appalling sexism and misogyny and the way he spoke about women all the way through his campaign. But she was defanged in her righteous opposition to that by her own backstory of having stayed with a man who, in fact, did many things that were worse than just talking about them. So she couldn't, that was a terrible problem for her because she couldn't retaliate. Then she had to sit in a debate with her husband's 5 ex-mistresses sitting there like horrendous gargoyles, you know, staring at her, produced by Trump. And again, she just could have nothing to say about this. So it was tragic, really, to see that happening. And then she also had to embrace Obama's record. She had to love on Obama, even though a lot of Obama's record was very, very antipathetic to most of the electorate. So she had to sort of support him. Then she had her aide, Huma Abedin, who had, I mean, was a victim of, to the most baffling degree of having fallen in love and married to this appalling, you know, Anthony Weiner, who was then caught sexting underage girls, arrested, and now is a sex offender, had his computer confiscated on which there were these emails, which then became again part of her case. So the whole time she was constantly being thwarted, if you like, by sort of male malfeasance, which she'd somehow had to own as part of her generational dynamic of not leaving, in a way.
So basically you're saying Bill screwed Hillary.
They screwed each other. Because actually his whole foundation has been blown up because she ran. So I would say that they have a lot to talk about with each other at night in terms of who lost this election.
I wanted to ask about the fallout of this big man-woman chasm almost that we are faced with. Is celibacy the answer? I find a lot of people opting for singlehood. We have our Prime Minister who's most likely celibate. Is that an option of this whole man-woman thing? Or is gay relationships the other fallout of this? Knowing that there is so much game playing in the man-woman relationship, perhaps people are opting out of conventional, traditional relationships because they don't come with this legacy of known behavior or expected behavior. So, Manu, you go first. You did talk about gay rights.
I think there's a crucial qualitative difference between celibacy and singlehood. Single people are people who have lots of sex. And celibacy, I think celibacy is very close to a long marriage. You know, I think people in long marriage are also celibate. So I think, we have to, I think, understand what these two different things are. No, there is something else which is going on, which I think is very important. Now, this is also an age of loneliness. Everywhere I feel, I hear and I see people who feel they are lonely. And they are with a lot of people. They are in communities and they are in groups and they are in very happy situations like bars and they're having brunches. But most people are becoming lonely. And the way I see it is that, and we can't escape the fact, I think that when we belong to someone, which means that you also surrender freedoms, I think that is what can help us. That is what can save us from loneliness. This is also an age of extraordinary freedoms. I think the more free we become, the less is it possible for us to surrender to someone, or that's the celibacy of long marriage or other forms of surrenders, or love itself. It's like a prison. So I feel that's the unconscious choice that people are making. It's like, I don't care. I don't mind being lonely, but I don't want to be in the prison of a relationship. Or people want to choose between relationship and I would sacrifice freedoms.
I wanted to ask Andrew about Shakespeare and what he would have done with apps like Tinder. You know what Tinder is. You see somebody and you keep pressing forward, swishing forward.
I see, Malvika, that was a left swipe that you made automatically.
The left swipe.
Left or right, yeah.
Left to right. So how do you think Shakespeare would have got his head around Tinder and speed dating and apps like that?
Well, I think Shakespeare would have loved Tinder, probably, because of course, I think it's ironic, often the conversation around Tinder is people hold their heads in horror and say how disgusting this idea of just judging people by their photos. But of course, once you select someone on Tinder, I understand, you can then message them. So actually it restores the sense of text to a beginning of a relationship. It's a bit like the 18th century, people writing each other letters, the kind of combination of sort of flirtation and language and all of those sort of playfulnesses, I think Shakespeare would absolutely have
And it
loved.
would have given rise to enormous comedies.
Exactly. And they're there, aren't they, in the plays? You were saying a moment ago, that perhaps we're finding a new set of freedoms, or we don't quite know what to do with the freedoms that we have around the relationships that we have, or the decisions that we take about the way we lead our lives. Again, I think in a historical sense, in Shakespeare's day, in the Elizabethan period, these things were more fluid. Shakespeare was married, he had children. He also hung around with an acting company where boys dressed as women.
Was he bisexual?
Well, he wrote 14 odds, 118, depending on how you measure sonnets to another man, to another male figure.
Is that established?
Well, they are very clearly addressed to a man, most of them, from presumably a man. So at the very least, Shakespeare is experimenting with the idea. But again, I think it's always the interesting thing about Shakespeare. He's experimenting, he's playing with it. He's not saying this is it or that is it. He's saying, look at this interesting space and look at how we can play around with it. And whether that means he's bisexual in a way that we would understand it, whether, who knows? But I think he's fascinated by those questions.
Which brings me to, Manu, I wanted to ask you, do you really think that one person can satisfy another person's entire bag full of needs? Okay. Social, emotional, sexual, financial, and every other emotional. So do you really think that this whole idea of two people chained together for the rest of their lives, having to satisfy each other, is a viable proposition anymore?
It's a lovely question. Before that, the thing about Tinder, I wanted to add something. What I find, I'm not allowed to be on Tinder.
Sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
I'm not allowed to be on Tinder because, it's,
Okay.
it's for those single people, officially. So I find it interesting, though, because the stakes are so low on Tinder. Where is the shame when you're rejected? Like, for example, when I was, say, 16 or 17, and there was Maria, who was beautiful, and who would be walking on the street, and I would be there, of course, 2 hours early to accidentally waylay her. And then you talk, and then you ask something, and when you're rejected, that shame is enormous. So the stakes are so high. So everything is thrilling, and everything had value. And when there's such a beautiful moment in Disgrace, when James Coodsey's Disgrace, when this character who's a heterosexual, he wants to try out homosexuality, and he comes close to the man, and then he says, this is too low stakes. And I think it's a point which most people would miss, but when you are someone who can be easily ashamed by a rejection, you see the intensity of the relationship.
But you're saying the rejection is private and there is some degree of separation from the person because it's virtual?
No, the shame is, even though it's private, there is a witness to your rejection, which is the most important person in that moment, has considered you not so important to spend an evening with you. So it's a rejection, and that's what I mean by the stakes are high, because you're ashamed or you're rejected. So those things have been completely eliminated on Tinder, which is great in some ways, but I feel that the stakes are so low, so I wonder what's the pleasure? Well,
I think that Tinder is just so transactional that it's crushing. I mean, I think it's it's a great way. It's particularly good for boys, I think, but for girls, where does it come that you start to get to know somebody and find that they're hilariously funny or very clever or much more amusing than you expected, or you didn't like the way they look, but they actually, have a fantastic personality, character, things that you love about them. It's so superficial that, unless you happen to be fit into the stereotype of what's hot right now, you just never get picked. And that can leave you feeling so rejected. I mean, I know so many young women who feel absolutely rejected by Tinder that they end up just convening together, that they have a kind of, the girls in America right now, it's very interesting, and the urban girls, they just convene together all the time. It seems like more and more you see girls just going to parties with just girls. I mean, I keep saying, where are the boys? It's like, and the boys are off on their own, and they are texting the girls are summoned. It's like being a cool girl, actually, because you're picked and summoned. And I personally think that is death to intimacy, actually.
So Tina, what do you think? That it is possible in this day and age of so much change for two people to really believe that they can satisfy all of each other's needs?
Well, I mean, you're speaking to someone who's been married for 30 years, to someone who does actually. My husband and I feel extremely close on every level, and we still do, and we're very lucky to have found each other. I think finding a soulmate has always been a huge problem. I don't think, finding a soulmate is easy at any era, any time, any place, really. And you have to be willing to just realize that your marriage is going to sort of evolve and not necessarily be the same marriage it was when you began. But I do think that a shared passion for something other than each other is also very important to keep something going. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be your garden or it could be your, you know, something you do together. But having that bond makes you grow together and sharing the tribulations that you've gone through. So, I mean, I certainly think that in America people get divorced way too easily, that, you know, they don't seem to think. And in fact, one of the ironies of Hillary Clinton's situation is that she got more stick for staying with her husband than any other thing. I mean, it's almost like the thing she was stoic about, i.e. her marriage vows, she got no points for it, which I think in some ways is tragic, really, because it means that she lost out on every level.
True. What do you think? Two people can live together, grow together, and really, without any doubt, satisfy each other's needs?
Well, this is absolutely an utopian situation that you're talking about.
Exactly.
So I would not like to put it in, you know, in black or white in that sense. But I would also not be so pessimistic about it as to not believe that relationship between a man and a woman can be to a large extent fulfilling and satisfying, whether it meets all the needs as has been stated by her or not. I would also believe that there is an effort that needs to be put into a relationship, because as we all know, there are no free lunches. And that if there is an equal amount, and this was so beautiful that Tina said, that she herself believes that you can evolve in a relationship, whether you call it marriage or otherwise. I'm not going to be sort of, you know, sort of very particular about it has to be only a marriage. It could be any relationship between man and a woman, which could be, and I always say that on all my things, that the basis or the fundamentals in any relationship to survive is respect and trust. I think love is more of the, you know, it's just the topping or the cherry on the icing, as they would call it. Love is really not the fundamental reason for two people to be together. But if there is mutual respect, if there is trust between two people who are in a relationship, either in marriage or otherwise, then you build up that relationship based on that. And then you will have companionship. You may achieve love, you may not even achieve love, but you will have a sense of companionship and belonging to each other to a large extent, not 100%.
Andrew, do you believe?
Sorry. I have a theory that monogamy was the invention of an unattractive man at some point in our tribal society. You know, someone who looked like Amar Singh or something, who decided that guy definitely didn't look like Milan Soman. So a guy who looked like Amar Singh said, okay, now everybody is going to be monogamous, because it suits, I think, suits most people, in fact. I'm happy I get at least monogamy, you know. I think most people should be. But I think it works at many levels, and I feel that I look at life this way, where like vampires store their souls in many places. I don't know why they do it, but they do that. I think we also can. I mean, you don't have to meet everybody without clothes, you know. But there could be very valuable relations, which you can do where you can just on the boundaries or whatever, you know, where you can store yourself and what you want to do, and you can have tennis mates and you can have hiking mates, and I think it can be rich. I think life is rich if we spread it out, and there are all kinds of people.
And of course, there's a new phrase that's doing the rounds, which is friends with benefits. Yeah. So added to this whole compendium of man-woman relationships, there's one more. But I wanted to ask Andrew, do you believe in true love? And having said that, you are in a country which for years and centuries has believed in arranged marriage. So how do you see that in context of true love and arranged marriages?
I mean, you sort of have to, don't you? I mean, I don't know what else would, at some level, you have to believe that. It's one of the strongest human impulses there is for love, isn't it? I mean, it's hugely important. But I was thinking, I mean, you know, as we were discussing these sort of various ways of living in relationships, can a perfect partner exist? I was thinking of the Shakespearean examples. I mean, it's often said there are no happy marriages in Shakespeare. Actually, I think there are probably two.
Macbeth
and Lady Macbeth. look how well that went. And Gertrude and Claudius in Hamlet, you know, the woman who marries the man who kills her previous husband. So I don't know what Shakespeare would say other than perhaps despair and run away somewhere else.
Would you say that they were happy love affairs or complicities of power?
The Macbeths.
Well, both those marriages.
Both. I think, I mean, you look at the way that Shakespeare writes the language. I mean, Macbeth, you know, calls, you know, dear, dearest, she says. You know, the terms of intimacy there, I think, yeah, I think they are happy relationships. And that's one of the challenges that Shakespeare says, well, happy relationships don't always end in great places, and happy relationships can do terrible things as well.
The best marriage I've seen is in House of Cards.
The most effective, yeah.
I think it's the most beautiful and convincing marriage
Yeah.
or relationship between a man and a woman.
May I just add here one thing, if I'm permitted to? In my experience as a lawyer, I've seen, and this is really, really very strange, that out of 10 cases that I've handled, 7 of them are people going for divorce from a love marriage, as we call it in our Indian context, and 3 of them out of those 10 are from arranged marriages. So I don't know what is this equation all about. I mean, I've really never understood that why would so many love marriages, and I would say more than 50%, 60%, or whatever you may call it, in my experience, do end up going to the divorce courts vis-a-vis those marriages which were traditionally arranged, or the partners didn't know each other, but you know, just came to know each other. But this is a reality, at least in the Indian scenario, and you can check that from the divorce courts in India also.
Tina, what on earth do you make of arranged marriages?
Well, it absolutely fascinates me because I actually had dinner with a wonderful couple last night, and the wife startled me by saying it was an arranged marriage. They'd been together for 35 years, and they were marvelous together. It's such an alien concept, you know, in Britain and America where I lived, but I've come to see how it can actually work, and perhaps for some of the reasons that I was saying, namely that a very careful investigation of background shared interests was done at the very outset, which would then survive the romantic passing. So that actually that it may not have begun with romance, but at the point where it's furthered beyond romance, it actually works very well, because actually people have so many shared interests, culture, friends, relatives, and so on. Those are the things, the ties that bind, more than you know, the romantic passions. But at the same time, I'm fascinated that there's enough self-discipline within that you know, romantic love doesn't invade the marriage, or perhaps it does. Maybe it is what we haven't heard from you, and I'd absolutely love to know, is how much infidelity is there inside those happy arranged marriages?
So we can only talk about the statistics that we know of. So obviously the 3, the way I said that out of 10, 3 that come to it, the reasons for those 3 coming is infidelity. And some of them are, I mean, maybe 1 out of those 10 may be based on, you know, incompatibility or not getting along together. But of course, infidelity today is one of the basic, I would say, issues that arise in a marriage. And these days, the infidelity, earlier, say 10 years back, 15 years back, infidelity was only supposed to be, you know, a man's domain. But today we also, and I'm talking purely from the statistics and from the cases that I deal with. Today, infidelity is no longer only a male domain. There are a lot of cases where women also are sort of accused, let's call it right now, because it's not right to say, accused of infidelity, and who do, I mean, their husbands come to courts based on the fact that the woman is in an adulterous relationship. So I guess, yes, that could be one of the sort of factors which would be very relevant in an arranged marriage about infidelity, but just keeping it under, you know.
I think on that happy note of infidelity, especially propagated by women, which requires a round of applause, really. We can open up the discussion to the audience. Any questions? Yeah, the lady right in front. Who would you like, a mic, please? Who would you like to ask the question to? Why don't you stand up here? A mic to her? Oh, this, okay. Would you like to come up? Here. Why don't you take this?
Good afternoon, jury. Thank you for giving me the platform to express my views and clear my queries out. So I am a feminist writer myself, and with this, in this era of development and education, when many opportunities are open to women, and I believe, at least I believe, that even men have probably transformed their mentality and are open to women, the idea of success and women going hand in hand. Yeah. So, according to you, how popular is the idea of stay-at-home dad and the idea that in a marriage, a woman is the earning member and man is looking after the household chores? Can the marriage be successful?
Well, well, I don't go to an office now, so I'm at home. And the only observation I have to make is that I can get away with a lot of things which my wife can't. Like, for example, when I'm writing in my room, I don't open the door. I mean, they can keep ringing the bells, and I just don't open the door, and then I think there's some kind of a crisis, and it resolves itself. And it's become, in the colony where I live, it's become very fashionable for men to be at home, because then either they are very highly placed with their CEOs, who have their own timings. Because at 11 on Monday in my colony in Gurgaon, there are men in shorts who just wander around. And usually they are CEOs or they are others, and some of them are journalists like me. So what has happened is that we are under no pressure to do stuff we don't want to do. There is a beautiful comedian called Ali Wong, and you should watch her on Netflix if you can. It's called Baby Cobra. She's 6 months pregnant. She comes on the stage, and she says that feminists have ruined everything for her. And she says that, well, we've been asked to lean in, and she says, I want to lie down, but now I'm under immense pressure to do a set of things because that's what is expected of the modern woman. I mean, I understand that feeling, because there is nothing which is expected of me. Just once my daughter, who's 8 years old, she said that maybe you should go to an office because it's very embarrassing, because all the other guys are going somewhere important, and she also said you'll learn something. But apart from those kind of pressures, it's kind of easy and kind of nice being a man nowadays, Like when I was 16, 17, all these boys used to study for engineering, and they had to go out and do things. It was so difficult to be a man. Now we are like, I think maybe
Kept
this is
men.
called liberation.
Kept men. Everybody wants to be kept. Yes, just last question to the gentleman here to keep the balance in gender-woman, man-woman relations, and then we'll wind this up.
Good afternoon. Excellent session. Actually, we are balanced. If you look technically, 50% comes from your mother, 50 comes from your father. The balance is embedded in the design. Somewhere, the whole discussion, instead of supplementing and complementing, why does it transform to conflicting and competing? If that attitude of supplementing and complementing happens, it is a divine, beautiful, and soulful. The word is soulmate. Go beyond physical layer, metaphysical, metabiological, then you understand this beauty of so-called men, women. Any thoughts?
Excellent. No, I don't think we have the time for this, but all you men, all you women, all you people in between, just go out and procreate in whichever way you can. Go forth. Thank you so much for this session, Manu, Tina, Andrew, Mrunalini, and see you at the next one.
Thank you.